I think we're live. Hi, YouTubers. It's me, Lonnie Clark, Nuts for Art. Thanks for joining us again and listening to this book, this reading of the book, New Nuclear Dangers by Dr. Helen Caldicott. Thank you, Dr. Caldicott, for allowing me to read your book on my YouTube channel, and it is airing on kepw.org. And for those of you following me on YouTube, you might want to go and in the next week or so, it's going to be up there. And so I think I'm going to post it on my YouTube channel also as one big long piece. I think I'm going to piece it together because I'm editing out a lot of my chatter here to you as YouTubers for the radio show because they can't see a lot of things that I say. Well, look at this and look at that. And then, you know, they're on the radio, so they can't hear it. So like all of this little chitter chatter is going to be all edited out. So it makes like these readings much more succinct, like they are continuous, you know. So anyways, we're also going to be airing this one and Carl Grossman's book, Weapons in Space. So it's going to be two sets of books being read. And they're going to play anti-nuclear songs after it and before it. And so it's pretty awesome. The legal name is KEPW LP. And that is, I don't know why they have to say LP, but that's their legal name. So anyways, I want to thank them for their support. And thanks for being like one of the few radio stations that's willing to have a lot of anti-nuclear stuff on. And it is an FM station in Eugene, Oregon, 97.3. And it's nonprofit. So can't say enough about them. Let me get in on the reading. We left off on page 29. Corporate mergers and nuclear policy. The most powerful military corporation on earth, Lockheed Martin, was created in 1993 by a series of corporate mergers. During the 80s and the early 90s, there were 10 to 15 major U.S. weapons firms. However, in 1993, Defense Secretary Les Aspin concluded that the Pentagon could no longer sustain the enormous weapons procurement budgets of the lavish Reagan years. And in an early 1993 meeting, Undersecretary of Defense William Perry bluntly informed industry executives of the new Pentagon policy of encouraging corporate mergers. That seminal meeting was triumphantly dubbed the Last Supper by Norman Augustine at the CEO of Martin Marietta, and subsequently the guiding hand behind the mergers. Martin Marietta merged with Lockheed to become Lockheed Martin, a $35 billion behemoth and the #1 contractor for the Pentagon, NASA, and the Department of Energy. Boeing absorbed McDonnell Douglas, and Raytheon bought the military units of Hughes Aircraft and Texas Instruments to become #2 and #3, respectively. Wow, I did not know that. That makes sense. There was a huge Raytheon building when I lived in Redondo Beach that was there. Other smaller firms survived, including TRW, Northrop Grumman, and United Defense, but their earnings were significantly lower than those of the big threes. Ironically, the Pentagon has not closed a single major weapons production line since the mergers were instituted. With a smaller number of corporations now bidding competitively for military contracts, prices have gone up, not down, and in the end, no actual savings have been passed on to taxpayers. Two government officials, William Perry and his Pentagon colleague, John Deutsch, both of whom were past paid consultants to Martin Marietta, shepherded the mergers through the government bureaucracy. Officially, it was against the law for Perry and Deutsch to act on behalf of their former employers, but they obtained a conflict of interest waiver from Defense Secretary Aspin. Perry and Deutsch went so far as to change the Pentagon's contracting rules, thus allowing the merging companies to be compensated for costs involved in moving factories, for legal fees, and for executive bonuses, a policy memorably dubbed payoffs for layoffs by Congressman Bernie Sanders in Vermont. This type of corporate orchestrated merger and payoff operation is a classic example of the revolving door syndrome. Corporate employment leads to a Pentagon position, where one is then able to feather bed the nest of one's corporate colleagues. Then, when the government term of office expires, some return to private industry equipped with invaluable Pentagon connections. Lockheed Martin realized a taxpayer-financed windfall from the merger amounting to $1.2 billion. The company also became the single largest advocate of aggressive nuclear development in the country in the quest to protect its billions of dollars worth of government arms contracts, $18 billion in 1997. Less than 2 months after the September attack, on September 11 attacks, the Pentagon awarded Lockheed Martin a mammoth contract of $200 billion over the next several decades to build 3,000 F-35 Joint Strike Fighter planes. Wow. Okay. Birth of a Death Merchant, new subtitle. As Lockheed Martin came to power, so did Norman Augustine, CEO of the newly merged company and perhaps the key player on the corporate side of the military-industrial equation. Augustine personally received $8.2 million in government payouts stemming from the merger. As one Pentagon source noted, if you're concerned about corporate welfare, the one you should look out for is St. Norman Augustine. Former Tennessee Governor Lamar Alexander also got $250,000 for the hardship he endured when asked to leave the board of the newly merged company. Lamar Alexander, he became a senator. Originally a forest ranger, Augustine majored in geological engineering. As a first-year graduate student, however, he was utterly shocked when the Soviet Union, I'm going to start that paragraph over. Originally a forest ranger, Augustine majored in geological engineering. As a first-year graduate student, however, he was utterly shocked when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. I couldn't imagine how he could be number 2, he said, and within months he took a job at the Douglas Aircraft Corporation. He has stayed in the weapons industry ever since. He has seen weapons productions as a patriotic duty, and he refers to the military corporations as the Fourth Armed Service, noting that an increase in spending on weapons is a national imperative, not merely a means to increase corporate profits. While he led the nation's largest corporate military contractor, Augustine also was influential in other areas. As chairman of the Defense Science Board, a Pentagon panel, he helped to decide for or against multi-billion-dollar weapons projects. He was the president of the Association of the United States Army, a politically influential group of retired Army personnel, and he served as chairman of Defense Policy Advisor Committee on Trade, a committee that gives confidential guidance on arms exports to the Secretary of Defense. Beyond his military credentials, Augustine also is the chairman of the American Red Cross and president of the Boy Scouts of America. Wow. So Dr. Caldicott is actually highlighting something that Carl Grossman talked about. We pay these private contractors our money. They create think tanks to guide policy, nonprofit think tanks, and their policy drives the weapons industry with our tax dollars. Mission accomplished, I guess, huh? Gotta love it. It's quite clever. A hard-driving man conversant with all the major policy and technical issues affecting Lockheed Martin, Augustine was a high-stakes lobbyist and became an unofficial and intimidating policymaker, successfully advocating initiatives that yielded billions of dollars in government funding for his corporation. Former government officials declined the opportunity to testify in Pentagon procurement recommendations because Norman Augustine really wants this. During the summer of 1994, he had such a presence on the Hill that one staff member referred to him sarcastically as the Secretary of Defense. Augustine continued his dynamically influenced role as CEO of Lockheed Martin until 1998, when he was replaced by Vance Kaufman. But Augustine remains on the board, an effective lobbyist for his company, and he continues to participate in military-related activities. He sat on a congressionally mandated bipartisan committee to investigate increasing terrorist threats to the United States. He also participated in a committee in 2001 to assess the efficacy of the ill-fated Osprey helicopter. New subtitle, What Norman Wants. One of the ways military corporations curry favor with lawmakers is by employing people in multiple political districts. The legislators express gratitude for increased employment in their districts by enacting legislation that forces the Pentagon to spend money on weapons that it doesn't necessarily want or need. Let me get a little sip of water. Hang on. Lockheed Martin, headquartered in Bethesda, Maryland, has major military research and production centers in 8 other states: Morehouse, New Jersey, Marietta, Georgia, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Fort Worth, Texas, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Vandenberg Air Force Base in Sunnyvale, California, and at the nuclear test site in Nevada. And the Colorado Springs, Colorado site, that's the weapons in space site. That's the headquarters for the weapons in space. That's what Carl Grossman's book said. But actually, the corporation maintains facilities in 50 states. As John Pike, formerly of the Federation of American Scientists, said, Lockheed Martin carries a big political footprint. Since 1994, when the Republicans gained control of both houses in Congress, billions of dollars beyond Pentagon requests have been added each year to the military budget. For instance, in the years 1996 through 98, $20 billion extra was added, 3/4 of which was earmarked for weapons that benefited only their corporate producers. Dozens of unnecessary weapon systems were crammed into the Pentagon's budget during the Gingrich era in an add-on game called The Waste That Keeps on Wasting. An egregious example of the huge C-130 military transport plane. An egregious example is the huge C-130 military transport plane manufactured by Lockheed Martin just outside Newt Gingrich's congressional district in Georgia. Since 1978, the Air Force has requested only 5 of these planes, yet Congress built 256, the ratio of 50 for each plane requested. Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona was heard to say that there were so many surplus 130s that we could use them to house the homeless. Indeed, the Air Force was forced to retire more than a dozen C-130s because they had no use for them. And Congress doesn't even budget the actual operation of the planes, said to be $1 billion over the next 6 years. These C-130s are deployed as trophies of National Guard units in the states of key congressional members. For example, more than a dozen C-130s sit in Kessler Air Force Base in Trent Lott's home state of Mississippi. Merged money talks. Political donations represent even more overt efforts of the huge new military corporations to affect policy. In 1997, and for example, military corporations spent more than $2.4 million contributing to political campaigns and parties. From 1991 to 1997, they surpassed even the tobacco companies in political donations by a margin of 32.3 to $26 million. Wow. Lockheed Martin led the pack. One Lockheed operator, Bernard Schwartz, a former company board member who owned the L'Oreal industry before it merged with Lockheed in 1996, gave $601,000 to the 1996 Democratic War Chest and more than $1.1 million to the Committee of the Democratic Party in 2000. In just 2 years, 1997 and 1998, America's biggest 6 weapon makers spent $51 million actively lobbying for their killing weapons. Lockheed Martin alone spent $10.2 million lobbying in 1997 and 1998. Of course, most lobbying activities are tax deductible. What do you think it is now, folks? Bet you it's gigantic. Lockheed Martin has even installed company people in key positions in Democratic and Republican presidential campaigns. For example, Lockheed's vice president, Bruce Jackson, served as vice chair for the Dole fundraising campaign in 1996. He subsequently occupied the same position for Governor George W. Bush in 2000. He doesn't care which party. Lockheed Martin shared the highlight of the 2000 Republican convention with other notable U.S. corporations, including the United States Tobacco Company, AT&T, Freddie Mac, and Southern Co. I don't know what Southern Co. is. Each of these firms contributed $60,000 to Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott for 50s style sock hop entitled The Lott Hop. Lockheed then cemented his political connection by pledging $1 million to the Trent Lott Leadership Institute. Lott, it turns out, had helped to bail out Lockheed's multi-million-dollar F-22 fighter plane project in the late 1990s, when it experienced huge cost overruns and was not performing according to specification. He also helped to fund the construction of many superfluous C-130 planes, and he vigorously supported the High Theater Altitude Area of Defense Project, the THAAD, Theater High Altitude Defense Project, THAAD, for which Lockheed received $4 billion. THAAD has failed 6 of the 8 tests. Dang. Yeah, Trent Lott, not so good. Lott's generosity did not stop there. In September 2000, he steered a bill through the Senate to provide $4 to $6 billion in tax subsidies to the tobacco, arms, and pharmaceutical industries over the next decade. As William Hartung, a senior fellow at the World Policy Institute, writes, the provision of the bill that would give double tax breaks to weapons exporters like Boeing, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin is particularly outrageous. These companies already benefit from over $7 billion per year in government grants, loans, and promotional activities designed to promote U.S. weapons. If there ever was an example of an industry that emphatically does not need more government subsidies, the U.S. weapons industry is it. Other corporate influence people at the Republican convention included House Majority Whip Tom DeLay, who received a Boeing Lockheed Award with no apparent embarrassment. When DeLay was later questioned about ubiquitous corporate donations, he said, "We're raising money left and right. We'll leave this convention with a significant amount of resources." Then he added, "It's cynical for the media to have to make that like it's bad. It's better to raise money than to have the government pay for elections." Wow. While 97% of Americans do not contribute to any political party, Lockheed Martin, TRW, Raytheon, and Boeing collectively gave $6 million in campaign contributions during the election year of 2000. Wow. These weapons firms have consistently contributed more to Republicans than Democrats by a 2-to-1 margin since the Republicans took control of Congress in 1994. The connections don't stop there. George W. Bush attempted to award a contract to Lockheed Martin to run the Texas welfare system. Bush relented in the face of strong public opposition. Lynn Cheney, the wife of the vice president, for years served on Lockheed's board, for which she received $120,000 annually in compensation. Dick Cheney himself served as Secretary of Defense under George Bush and was a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute from 1993 to 1995. He scored a 100% rating from the American Conservative Union and a 0% from the American for Democratic Action during the 80s. Appointed chief executive of Halliburton Corporation in 1995, he doubled the size of the company through a series of mergers and through business deals with the Pentagon. Under Cheney's reign, Halliburton became one of the nation's largest weapon contractors, ranking 22nd prime Pentagon contracts by January 2001. Cheney organized a $1.1 billion Pentagon contract for Halliburton to support military operations in the Balkans, and a $2.3 billion in government loans, an increase from $1.2 billion received over the previous 5 years. The company donated a total of $1.2 million to both political parties and Congress over 5 years. And in 1999, it spent $600,000 in lobbying, up from $280,000 in 1996. So it tripled. When Cheney retired to run for vice president, he left with a package of $20 million in stock options and an overall worth of $50 million. His Democratic opponent in the vice presidential race, Joseph Lieberman, is not without corporate taint either. Both Gore and Lieberman were avid solicitors of campaign funds from Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Lieberman was one of the first Senate Democrats to join Majority Leader Trent Lott and Senator Thad Cochran to support Star Wars. He lobbied extensively for the troubled Lockheed Martin F-22 plane. At $200 million per plane, it is the most expensive ever built. The engines are constructed by a branch of the United Technologies in his home state of Connecticut. Wow. He received over $96,000 in political donations from military corporations in 2000. Lieberman also supported loan guarantee programs for countries buying American weapons, and he voted against the Arms Sales Code of Conduct, legislation that prevents weapons from being sold to countries with poor human rights records or countries that may be working on developing nuclear weapons. He voted consistently against initiatives to reduce the U.S. military budget and supported programs to prevent transfer of money from military to domestic programs. For the past 5 years, he has served as the chairman of the Pro-Military Democratic Leadership Council with a corporation-friendly, pro-military, fiscally conservative agenda. Although Lieberman was vocal about religion and personal behavior during the campaign, as William Harton commented, the Democratic ticket demonstrated a failure of public ethics, not private morality. I'm going to stop there. That is actually a great place to stop. We're on page 36 for those of you that want to pick up the book and read it yourself. So put your courage feet on, you guys. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. Please thumbs up if you like this. And thanks for your comments. I really appreciate everybody that makes little comments. I'll talk to you later. Ciao.